Is it tradition? Is it legalism? Is it convenience? No, it's a biblical practice. Welcome to a primer on church membership. When you think about church belonging and membership in the modern evangelical church, there's going to be a big spectrum of practices and ways that people go about it. One of the big errors or confusions, misconceptions, is that when we talk about church membership, we're really just talking about something that the modern church has invented for the sake of ease of communication, and an organization or an institution gets big enough, you're going to have to do some paperwork at some point. And so church membership was born, and that's how we do it. But there's nothing wrong with not doing church membership. There's nothing less ideal about going to a church that doesn't do membership or not being a member at a church that does. Here's some pretty basic corrections that I want to bring to that idea and way of thinking around church membership. First of all, what is it? Church membership is an individual Christian belonging to a particular local gathering of an organized church with leadership so that they're kept accountable and they are particularly responsible to serve in, at, and through that local church. That's church membership. Secondly, how does that really get practiced? The way that this usually happens is that somebody applies for church membership. They need to be at the church for a certain amount of time. Leaders will assess them, interview them, make sure that they're living a consistent Christian life, and then they'll be entered into membership formally at some kind of members meeting. Maybe other members vote on them in a congregationalist type church. Maybe just the elders pass judgment and allow them in and add them to the roll in a more top-down type leadership church. Or maybe they just apply and they're automatically accepted, and maybe a bit more of a different style, more laid-back form of church. That's for the churches that do church membership in a formal way at all. Sometimes church membership, and it's all in air quotes, is a little bit more off the cuff or going by the vibe. It's a bit more of a verbal agreement. You attend here, you listen to this guy's preaching, therefore you belong to this church. The third question becomes, is one model more biblical than the other? And I would say yes, with some pretty gentle qualifications. Because we don't have a 3 Timothy and chapter 1 is all about how exactly to do formal church membership. Of course, there's been, even within the Reformed Church, or more broadly the evangelical Protestant church, and in fact going throughout all history, there's been different methods, different manners, and different ways in which church membership has been done when it's being done. Let me say yes, church membership, the idea that individual Christians should belong to one particular local church at a time where they submit to the eldership or the leadership, the pastors. They give to that church and through that church. They serve in that church and through that church. And they are discipled and kept accountable at that church. The idea that each individual Christian should be doing that is very, very biblical, at one church at a time. That means you move somewhere else, you go to a different church, you apply for membership at that church, you no longer belong in that sense. It's very practical, where you belong, where you get discipled, where you're accountable. It is a biblical practice to be doing this, and as I said, it's not as if we have an exact chapter that tells us how it should work, but the fact is this: much of the New Testament makes little to no sense if we don't understand that the early churches were functioning this way. In other words, there's chapters or there's passages or there's exhortations or there's commandments, there's practices that we see in the New Testament that if we remove this idea that individuals belong primarily and as a matter of priority at a local church at a time for accountability and responsibility, if we remove that thinking, passages just stop making sense. If all church is universalized, we all belong to the global church, any church is my church, any teacher is my teacher, which in a sense is true, but if we universalize that right down to the bottom so that we remove the need and the responsibility of church membership being recognized and formalized by each local church, passages stop making sense. One example is Hebrews chapter 13, verse 7. It says this: "Remember your leaders, those who spoke to you the word of God. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Here's a passage that simply cannot mean and loses all of its meaning if it does mean universal, all leaders everywhere who are Christians, who are pastors, who are preachers. First of all, it's improper that he would call them leaders because they're not leading you. In a podcast, social media age, people can live thousands of miles away and call somebody their pastor because they listen to some of their sermons or listen to their podcasts, but they're not leading you. They're not actually taking you by the hand, directing you in life, giving you personal conversation and exhortation and rebuke. And of course, a lot of people like that. They don't like being led, right? They want to be led when they feel like they want to be led. They don't actually want to be told what to do. That's not leading. So your leaders are somebody who's leading you. So I'm going to ask you, who is leading you? Should be your pastors. Remember, your leaders, and then he caveats it, those who spoke to you the word of God. So he's already defined what a leader in this sense is. It's the pastors who open up the Bible and preach to you, who do Bible studies with you, who meet you over coffee and open the Bible and give advice to you. The men who speak to you the word of God in your local church, they're your leaders. Remember them. He goes even more specifically. He says, consider the outcome of their way of life. That means, two things about them at least. Their way of life and the fruit of their life. So that means this leader has to be somebody close enough to you that you can see the way they do life, see the way that's a phrase I don't use often, do life. Moving on. You need to be able to see the way they study the Bible and the fruits of wisdom that come from it. You need to see the way they parent and the fruit of their family that come from it. You need to see the way that they accept or reject certain cultural practices and what benefits that bears in their life. How they husband and what fruit comes in their marriage. You need to be able to see their life up close. You can't do that with a podcaster. You can't do that with Pastor Bob down the street that you've never met. You cannot consider them. You cannot imitate their way of life or their faith. So, Hebrews 13:7, it must mean, and it assumes that we're obeying Hebrews chapter 10, which tells us meet together regularly, sit under the preaching of the word of God, exhort one another constantly, gather regularly. So there is the expectation, the presumption in the New Testament that the Christians to whom any one of these letters is written is belonging to, responsible for, and accountable to a particular local church under ordained elders. And the rest of the chapter actually gives us different instructions that, again, get even more specific. For example, verse 17 of Hebrews chapter 13. Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you. Here's a couple of things to note from this passage. It says, obey your leaders. So if you generalize leaders, like you try to generalize verse 7, if you generalize leaders, then you have to obey every guy out there with a badge and an office that says he's a pastor, a prelate, a priest, he or she says that they're a preacher, says that they're in a church, or even says they're an apostle. You have to listen to them because they're a leader in the global church. That can't be what this means. That makes no sense. It says, obey your leaders and submit to them, right? Follow their leadering, fall in line behind them, allow their authority to bear weight on you. It says this, because they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account. So this is a word from the pastor's side. If they're going to give an account for you on Judgment Day, how did they lead you? How did they pastor you? What advice did they give you? Did they pray for you? Were they good shepherds? They also are keeping watch over your souls now, knowing that that's the day of judgment that's coming. Do you really think that people who've never met you, who don't know you, who are out there anywhere, they're going to be giving an account for you? Would you really say that they're watching over your souls? We can't generalize that. This is a word about the local church, where individual Christians should belong, be responsible for, and accountable to under the leadership. Now there's more to the structure and health of a church than just having leaders you submit to, but this is a very central, vital part of it, and no doubt it's one of the most unpopular parts of church membership is being accountable to a particular board of elders or team of pastors or group of leaders who speak authoritatively the Word of God. So, that's a primer. Look into it more. I encourage you, if you're at a church and you're not a member, inquire about being a member. If you're at Hope and you're not a member, come and talk. We'd love to. And if you are a member, recognize that this is not just a pragmatic invention. It's not just a legalistic tradition. It is, in fact, a very biblical way of managing souls, of caring for people, and of undertaking the commandments that Paul gives us about how we should be practicing as a church. You have